Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here with Philippe J. Fournier for this new episode of the Numbers Podcast. It's been quite a week over the last few days between you and I, Philippe. We did our 2 live streams on Saturday, on Monday. We're launching a new sort of thing with our podcast. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. But how are you doing?
You know what? How many weeks was last week? I'm not sure, but I feel really good. I'm happy that it's over with. I'm happy it happened. I mean, the polls were really good, right? We'll talk about this. And so the projections, even though they were not perfect, there were a lot of new factors, a lot of new variables, did also okay. And it was fun to hang out with you and our members on the stream. So yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy on how it went. So, and how about you, Eric? How are you today?
I'm doing really well. They were also surprisingly fun, I would say.
Yeah,
BC was closer than we thought it would be.
My God.
Had some surprises. New Brunswick was not as close as we thought it would be. Had a big surprise with the defeat of Blaine Higgs in his own riding. Yeah. We are going to talk about everything that's been happening in Ottawa because clearly it's been a big week, but maybe not as big as a week as we thought it might be. But we think we're going to start with those elections because we've been talking about them so much. So we're going to start with, I think, the big one, British Columbia. Boy, that was a close election. That was about as close as it can get. So the final top line numbers for the initial count
for now
was
that's right.
46 seats for the New Democrats, 45 for the BC Conservatives, 2 for the Greens. The NDP took about 45% of the vote. The Conservatives took 44%, and the Greens took 8% of the vote. It is still up in the air who's going to end up winning this election. There is going to be a final count taking place between the 26th and the 28th. They have about 49,000 ballots to count. These are mail-in ballots and absentee ballots. I feel like we're talking about a U.S. election.
That's right.
And there's a couple ridings where the margins were less than like 125 votes. So there is the possibility that some of them could flip. Seems unlikely because you would need to really win those mail-in absentee ballots to flip an outcome like that. But it doesn't really matter. If the NDP wins 47 or the Conservatives win 46 or 47, depending on how it goes, it was still a close election. What was your big takeaway from the results?
Well, okay, so many things, but first let's start with the polling. I think it's fair to say we describe polls as a little divergent during the campaign, but they really weren't that different in the last few days. And so something that we have to remember, that when you talk about the top line, let's say you say Conservative +3 or NDP +2, that is not one statistical measure, it's 2, right? And so one pollster can say NDP +2 and the other can say, let's say Conservative +2, and in the end they are both correct because they are both within the margin of error. So as you said, just a shade under 45% for the NDP, and it was, I think, 43.6 for the Conservatives. So if we round that, it's 44. Pollsters that said it would be 45-43, either way, were both correct. Being right on the money, like right in the center of the bullseye, is a bit of a matter of luck. So as long as you're within margin of error, you did your job as a pollster. And most of the pollsters, once again, were really good in this election. Doubt Canadian pollsters at your own perils. This is one other example that they were right on. And I know I had some messages last week, Eric, from Americans looking at these polls. It was like, oh my God, only like a province of 5 million people, and yet all these polls are really good. And it says it's been the trend. The polling misses have been, we've seen them, we remember them, but they've been like rare in the past decade. That would be
a lot of
the
polls, a lot of the polls that came out very close to the end were starting to show more of a +2, +3, +4. And some of the polls did have the Conservatives ahead at the end, even by very small margins. And that is exactly what we should have seen if the reality was NDP +1, right?
Exactly.
If the reality was NDP +1, we should have seen some NDP +4, some NDP +5, and we should have seen some Conservative +2, +3, which was what we saw. And when you do the regional, some regionals were worse than others, but when you average them all out, small sample sizes, so you know there is a little bit of an excuse, but when you average them all out, which is what we do, they were so close. There was no surprises at the regional level in terms of overall vote. Some sub-regional, we'll talk about that, I think.
Oh, yes.
But overall, it was a really strong performance for the pollsters. So our hats off to them.
Absolutely.
And we appreciate all the numbers they put out at the end. 10 pollsters at the end. That was pretty good for British Columbia. We appreciated that. And they told us what kind of race it was going to be. But it could have so easily been a Conservative win. And so it could have easily been an NDP majority with 47 or 48, 49 seats.
Oh,
which
even
is,
more
again,
than
what
that.
we were kind of expecting. Yeah.
I mean, I look at the result, Eric, and for example, I mean, we talked about it on the stream several times, but the election was decided in Surrey. And I must say, in my seat projections, if you look at the overall tally, it's not as high as I want it to be. My usually my comfortable threshold is 90% of correct winners. But we knew in this BC election, with a new map, a new contender, a party that dissolves into another one, there were tons of uncertainty. And half my misses are in Surrey. So really the NDP underperformed in Surrey, and obviously we did not have like polls of just Surrey. It's part of Vancouver CMA. It's part of so we didn't have that. But I mean, had the NDP pulled through in Surrey in all these close races, we're talking about a 54-seat majority for the NDP or 53-seat majority, and suddenly it's not that close. I mean, it's still close because the threshold is 47, but what the result that we have right now is insane. It's the redux of 2017 when we thought this one was a once-in-a-century event. But do we have a sense? Because it's Juan de Fuca Malahat. That is, I think, 23 votes? I have in my notes 23 votes.
Ended up being 20.
It ended being 20?
They counted a couple extra ballots. They found some.
But that's insane. 20 votes out of, I think I counted here, Juan de Fuca, wasn't it like 30,000 votes? But so I guess this one could flip. But when we're talking about 200 or 300 votes, the odds that it flips on mail ballots and absentee ballots is really low. Like one candidate would have to like basically win 70% of the mail-in votes.
And we saw,
go ahead.
I think it was Chad Skelton. I think I saw him post that historically the NDP has done better on the mail-in and the absentee ballots. So it would be contrary to that precedent if the Conservatives won that vote in Juan de Fuca Malahat. So that'll be something to see if that happens. But who knows? Like, we don't really know exactly how many votes are in each of these ridings. The average is 526, but there's going to be some where it's 800, 1,000. There's going to be some where it's 1 or 200. That we don't know. Some of them, maybe some of the other ones will flip. You mentioned how the election was decided in Surrey.
Yeah.
The 47th seat for the NDP is Surrey-Guildford.
Yeah.
So literally, they lost it in Surrey.
Yeah, literally.
They literally lost their majority government in Surrey. And I had the same kind of errors there. Surrey was where most of my errors were, or at least a lot of them. So that doesn't say, I think the way we think about it, that doesn't say that our modeling is incorrect. It says something happens there.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And clearly there was. I've heard a few on the Hotel Pacifico podcast. They were saying that there is the fact that it's a diverse community. Obviously, lots of South Asians maybe might have been a bit more socially conservative than other parts of Vancouver. But there is also lots of local issues. There's an issue with the building of a hospital, a tunnel, police forces. So there's other local things where people in Surrey might have been upset about the NDP. But it really does come down to Surrey, and
it's an occasion to readjust our models as well. I mean, let's be fair. If we took the example of Surrey-Guildford, the transposed data from 2020 is 60% NDP and 30% Liberal. I mean, there's nothing in the swings in the provincial poll or even the Vancouver CMA polls that suggested that the Conservatives could win, but it ended up being 47% to 47%. It's a tie. It's what was the margin in there? 150, I think. But so
less, I think.
But when you win 46 seats, and the threshold is 47. I guess any one of these can be like, oh, how did we miss this? I mean, how does Nathan Cullen in Bulkley Valley, Stikine loses this? Like, who could have foreseen that? He won by 25 points 4 years ago. The guy is well known, a former MP of the region for a long time, right? He was for over a decade. And so what happened there? That's what I want to know, because even though I read a lot of BC news in the past month to get up to speed, I did not read Bulkley Valley Sticky News. I apologize to those there. I couldn't. I mean, I don't think anybody like from outside saw this coming. But that's also a seat that in the projections you have. Okay, that's an NDP seat, and that would be the 47th. So yeah, very interesting results. I will have by the way, when the count is final, I will have the complete breakdown of how the projection did, how the polls did. I will have the pollster ratings, and many pollsters. And I don't want to say who, or it's not one or two. It's several pollsters have already reached out to me, say, "Hey, look how well we did, huh? That's a good rating, isn't it?" I laugh about it, but that's the one uncomfortable part of doing this. I publish my pollster ratings out of transparency. Sometimes I regret it, but part of it.
I used to do that at 308, and I stopped very quickly after I realized that there's a lot of sensitivity out there. But the thing that's going to happen is that you have 10 pollsters. The worst pollster still did pretty well. It's not going to be one where it's going to be someone who's completely out in left field, and one pollster was really good. The best performing pollsters in this campaign will be probably a couple tenths of a percentage point better than the second ranked and the third ranked and everything. So everybody did pretty well. What about what's going to come next in British Columbia? So one seat plurality for David Eby. Very likely to get the support of the Greens. We saw Sonia Furstenau even saying that she didn't return John Rustad's call. She says she didn't recognize the phone number.
Well, that's the thing.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
But
I kind of believe it, but also, somebody in there should know. So that means they never talked. They were both in the legislature. They're both party leaders. That was the first time they called. You would think that somebody's teams would say, okay, that number, it's the Conservative leader. So that was interesting, but we've been there. I give benefit of the doubt. You don't answer a number you don't know, especially these are crazy days right now. They're just not taking random calls they don't know the number from. So, it seems very unlikely to me that there'd be any common ground between the BC Greens and the BC Conservatives. Sonia Furstenau was already talking a lot about some of the issues she had with the party. So whether or not the NDP manages to flip a seat, go to 47, or even if the Conservatives get up to 46, if they do that, then it really gets messy. But it seems likely that you have a 46 NDP, 2 Greens, 48 votes on one side, 45 for the Conservatives on the other. So that could survive for a little while, but I'm pretty sure we'll be having an election in British Columbia maybe in a year or two. Yeah.
But what about the Conservatives? What happens to them next? I'm really curious about this. Because they got so close. Yeah. But the fact that they got so close, doesn't it raise questions of, what if they were just a little bit better? What if they had been a little bit more on message? What if they didn't have a couple of their candidates who had said dumb things in the past and had derailed the campaign? What if John Rustad was a little bit more charismatic? You do wonder if the Conservatives are going to take this as just a win, or as we need to make the tweaks to get over the top next time. Because this party is not exactly ready for prime time, but after 4 years or 2 years, they're going to start getting that public subsidy. They're going to be the only one raising money on the center right.
That's right.
They're going to be a big party, a real party next time. Does someone will the party stick together? Will they stay behind John Rustad? I'm not sure. I'm not sure about it.
I'm not sure, but I mean, even though it's entirely fair to be disappointed with the result when you're 1 seat short, or 2 seats short in this case, this should be seen with some perspective as a massive win for the Conservatives. They managed to do exactly what we said should happen a year ago, and yet it was so far-fetched because parties don't fold. This is really rare event. What happened to BCU is, we've seen it in the past. In the past 100 years, we can have some precedent. It's still really rare. And it worked. It worked. They had 44% of the vote, which was... I mean, this is more than Christy Clark had when she barely lost in 2017. And so this is a great result for them. Yes, the loss stings because it was close. But let's say, again, those Surrey ridings, let's say they fall on the NDP side because many of them were close margins. And then the final seat count is, I don't know, 53 to 40 or something. Then suddenly they would okay, we lost, but we'll be ready in 2028. Now they have maybe a year and a half, 2 years to get ready. Whatever you think of them, they will be a force in the coming years, I think. The polls show that they're right of center voters that are ready to follow them. The leadership, I'm not sure. It's true that Monsieur Rostad is not the greatest speaker, but he did manage to come that close. So if he improves a little bit, or if maybe he decides that he wants to stay in caucus, but maybe not the leader, he's not the man to beat it. I'm not sure, but the NDP will be an old government when next time BC voters go to the polls. There will be a huge opening for the Conservatives. So they should see this as a win and then move on until the next election.
And the NDP, I think, has to look at this as a very close shave. They almost got defeated. All of those vulnerabilities that we knew that the NDP had on issues, British Columbians were not satisfied with the government's performance on the healthcare system, crime and public safety, the opioid crisis, things like that. But they didn't like the alternative when it was Kevin Falcon and BC United. They almost decided they would go to the Conservatives. I think for the NDP, they have a lot of work to do to make sure they don't lose the next election, because it looks like it could be that the Conservatives are the government in waiting whenever that next election comes around. So
that's what it looks like. Yeah.
Anyway, really interesting election. We'll see what happens with the recount. So we'll talk about those results next week. Do you want to get to New Brunswick?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, New Brunswick. Okay, where do you want to start? Because this, I think we both agreed in the last stretch, even though we did not have much data to work with. But the data that was published, the data we had, once again, was really good. And we both wonder, oh my God, is it possible we see a 30 to 40 point swing in St. John? I talked to Keto Maggie, who in his first poll in New Brunswick, had the Liberals and PC tied in St. John in a pretty good sample size too. I mean, it was not the small, like 100 cases. And I said, "Are you sure about this? The PC's at 60% in St. John last time." And he said, "Well, that's what we got." And final poll came in on Saturday, same thing. And then we had, of course, that narrative poll that we talked about last week, with the cities, right? Which was such a good idea. Let's put it out there.
Thank goodness for that poll. Eh?
Thank you, Narrative Research and
Brunswick News.
That was a great poll. And again, it was tied in St. John. I was like, okay, this can't be wrong. Like, unless it can be wrong by a few points, but it can't be wrong by 30 points. And in the end, the Liberal, I mean, what a butt kicking that was. 31 seats against 16 for the PCs. What did you? Is there something that stood out for you, Eric?
Well, it was the fact that it was such an emphatic win. 48% of the vote for the Liberals in New Brunswick, in a context where the Justin Trudeau Liberals are not very popular. Only 35% for the PCs. You have to go back to 1995 to find a better result for the Liberals and a worse result for the PCs in terms of the seat count. Like, that's a long time ago. That's Frank McKenna. Those are the years when he was the next prime minister. A big performance for the Liberals. The polls, we talked a lot about the polls in British Columbia, so we should mention they did a decent job. The last two that we had the Main Street poll that came out, maybe 2 days before the election, and it Saturday.
Yeah.
What did it have?
48% for the Liberals, right on. And it was 38% for the PCs.
Yeah. It was a 10-point win,
Yeah, so both Forum Research and Main Street Research showed basically the same numbers. They had the Liberals within range. They had the Conservatives within range, but both a little too high, so the PCs underperformed their numbers. Yeah. And also, both polls, I mean, the Greens still got 14% of the vote, which I know the Greens in New Brunswick would be disappointed with a harvest of only 2 seats, but that 14% is high. And the pollsters had them at 9 or 10. So the Greens overperform, which I don't think is something we say that often.
No. And, we talked about St. John. They ended up winning St. John, depending on how you define it, by about 6 points. The PC still won in Fredericton, so I think that they got a lot of the People's Alliance vote, which was more stronger in Fredericton than it was in St. John or Moncton last time. And then they won Moncton by about 20 points. Yeah. And the swing, what's really interesting about this is that there was a vote inefficiency question about the Liberals, that in the past, they've needed to be ahead in the popular vote by more than 6 points to win the most seats. They really did a lot of work to get rid of that vote inefficiency because their vote jumped by a few points in Francophone New Brunswick, but it jumped by, like, I think 20 or the swing moved by a huge margin in Anglophone New Brunswick. So the Liberals made disproportionately their gains in the parts of the province that they needed to. I was looking at some of the ridings, and it wasn't just in the cities. I was looking at some of the rural ridings. So there's 3 rural ridings along the border of Maine that are Anglophone ridings. And the last time in 2020, they got something like 11 or 12% of the vote. This time, they didn't win any of them, but they got 29% of the vote in those ridings. So it wasn't just the cities, although it was dramatic in the cities what happened, but just throughout Anglophone New Brunswick, the Liberals took a lot of votes from the PCs. And the fact that it took down Blaine Higgs in his riding, which was, a PC plus 50?
I think it was plus. I'm going to pull this up, but I think it was plus. He had 55% of the vote, so I think it was a plus 40. Let me just pull this up. Oh no, hang on, no. Sorry. Okay. So it was a 50% lead. Yeah, that's insane.
It's insane. That was such a personal rejection. There's no other way to see that.
Yeah, personal rejection, and we remember the quarterly report of the premiers from the Angus Green Institute. Blaine Higgs was low, but I remember in 2020, Blaine Higgs himself was not that high anyway. That PC brand did a lot of work for him, but now it could not save him. I did not have Quispamsis Liberal in my projection. I know it ended up being close, but it was not. But also Rothesay. I did not have Rothesay in the Liberal column. So there were some surprises. I know smaller province, smaller ridings, the swing can be greater. But the Liberals, I mean, they have seats in every region of the province. It's not like they can say we won Francophones and then a few urban seats and that's it. They won in rural areas, they won Francophone areas, they won Anglophone areas. Susan Holt has a solid majority to work with. I mean, there's going to be a lot of work to do, and I know it's not going to be a honeymoon for very long. It usually isn't. Webb Kinew, I think, his honeymoon is a bit of a stretch. We'll see how long it lasts, but massive win. And after the PCs only were in power for 6 years. I know there have been a lot of changes in New Brunswick, but that's still not that long, right? A minority, one majority, and then you fall. And there's going to be, even though they absorbed the People's Alliance, they could not make it work. So it's going to be interesting going forward to see how they treat this defeat and how they react to it and who they will choose as leader. There's no way Blaine Higgs is coming back, right?
No, and I mean, he more or less said so. He kind of implied that it was pretty clear what was going to happen next. And what are the PCs going to do next? Are they going to double down on more of the right-wing turn that they took ahead of this campaign, or are they going to reverse themselves, try to get back to the old moderate kind of blue or red Tory PC party that is usually the case out in Atlantic Canada? Try to make outreach to Francophones. Their vote actually went up a teeny bit in the Francophone parts, but not nearly enough to put them in contention anywhere. So something to watch what it's going to be. And for the Liberals, Justin Trudeau, does he see something like this as a sign that, hey, we're not dead yet. We can still win?
Well, there will be some spin. I have to say, maybe there has been already. I have to say, I took a break from the news. I crunched the numbers. I punched in all the numbers on my computer, and I decided to do a little media blackout in the last few days. So maybe it has been said, but I don't think anybody would take that seriously. So there's a lot of ridiculousness coming out of Ottawa these days. I don't think we need more of them. If they went there, I mean, I would roll my eyes all the way to Pluto and back. So let's go.
All right. Speaking of lack of seriousness in Ottawa, there was a caucus revolt.
What a segue.
There was a caucus revolt this week.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure whether it was an impressive amount of rebellion, or if it wasn't. I think we were conditioned to think that the number of MPs that were calling for Justin Trudeau to step aside was starting to grow to 40, 50. Yeah. In the end, the reporting is that there was 24 Liberals. The letter was not exactly presented, but there was 24 MPs that stood up and said something to Justin Trudeau that he should step aside. A roughly equal number also stood up and defended the Prime Minister. He said that he's going to think about it. They gave him until October 28th to make a decision. And I'm not sure what the or else is. It doesn't, maybe it's, you have until October 28th or else we'll just drop this, which might end up being what it is. But it's hard not to also say, you know what, that's 24 MPs who get up and say you should step down.
Yeah.
How many MPs would do that in Pierre Poilievre's caucus right now? Zero. Even if we're talking about a share or proportion of the caucus, I'm not sure the NDP would even have anywhere close to that. This is not good news. He can survive out of this, but I mean, it's still a huge problem when at least 1 in 6, something like that.
Yeah.
Your MPs think that you should step aside. That's not something you can brush aside as you know what, we ended up talking it out, hashing it out. We have a plan for the future. We're going to survive here. This is still a big problem, and I just think it just shows that the Liberals are not in a strong position to wage the next election, regardless of whether they were 20 points back or 5 points back.
Wow, hot take, Eric. I agree. I agree. It was a rebellion with plastic forks and knives, but I'm sorry,
bamboo.
but
Bamboo,
yeah,
not
exactly.
plastic. Come on.
You just mentioned something that is numbers wise, right? So 1 in 6 MPs of the Liberals want the leader to step down, and you just said I'm not sure the NDP would get that. The NDP there are 25 of them, right? You don't think 4 MPs for the NDP, if you asked them, you gave them a truth serum, and you asked them, do you think you should change leaders? And they would say, oh, no. Jack Meeting is the man to lead us into the future.
Would they get up in a caucus meeting and say that? I'm saying no. I'm sure there's a couple of conservatives who wish it had been Jean Charest or someone else, but they're still happy to go along.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you would get 4 NDP MPs willing that things are at such a crisis point that they would get up and publicly call, or publicly within the caucus, call for Jagmeet Singh's resignation. So I just don't think that. I think that the other caucuses are far more united and willing to go ahead with what's going to happen in the next election than the Liberals. I don't think that's a stretch to say at all.
I think nothing unites a caucus like seeing another caucus fall apart, right? So that helps. We'll see after the election if the NDP salvages 20 seats, how many of them will call for Jagmeet Singh to say, you know what, you're not getting a 4th election. But I know, point taken. The Liberal revolt. I texted some journalists who were there in Ottawa yesterday, because I was in class on Wednesday. I have class pretty much all day, so I couldn't really follow the news. Not that I care that much. Again, I'm a bit burnt out from the weekend that we had, so I took a break and I asked them, so how's the revolt going? And he basically said, this is there's no backbone in there. There's no confrontation. There's nobody like swearing or throwing books at the wall. It's very polite and contrite. And okay, sir. So we would really like it if you step down if you want to, but if you don't, we'll still stay in caucus. I mean, the real move for those 24. I know it won't happen because they're too polite. But the real move that would send a message would be for those 24 MPs, or at least a big fraction of those 24 MPs, to say we'll sit as independents. I mean, we're probably going to lose our seat anyway next year, so let's go sit as independents and be the fourth largest caucus, because that's what they would be, right? Fourth, fifth. I mean, they would be behind the NDP, but close. But if they're not willing to say this is so important for us, this is so vital that we change leaders, that we'll play our seats, then what are we doing? I'm sorry, but I'm not saying that they should go up in arms, but I'm saying if you're trying to prepare a letter to ask a sitting prime minister to leave, you better be ready, because this has not happened very often, right? There's little precedent of a caucus revolting against a sitting prime minister. So if you want to do it right. And this is very unimpressive. But okay. But again, to go back to the numbers, if the Conservatives were polling at 36 and the Liberals at 30, this would not happen. Let's be fair here. It's because of the poor standings and the numbers for the prime minister himself and for the party.
Well, that's what you get from every MP who is saying something. They're not saying that Trudeau's awful and we hate him. They're saying Canadians aren't listening to him anymore, right? There doesn't seem to be a lot of personal dislike of Justin Trudeau within the caucus. And a lot of what we heard from the MPs coming out, even some like Wayne Long, who is, one of the public dissenters, saying how this was one of the best caucus meetings they had. It almost sounds like this will be a time when they all just got it out, and then they're all going to then hug it out and when it's all over. That's almost what it sounds like. And last Thursday, when we would have last chatted, I might have said more than 50% chance that Trudeau doesn't survive the week. Now I'm feeling like 10, 15%. It just doesn't feel like enough pressure was put on him. Now we don't, it could have been a very emotionally taxing thing for Trudeau. And there was reports that it was an emotional meeting. So maybe he ends up deciding over the weekend that, maybe I don't want to do this anymore. But it doesn't feel like it's because the metaphorical gun has been put to his head by his caucus. It feels like it was a very soft. If it was a coup, it was smothering. It was a pillow smothering. It wasn't. Wasn't violent.
My needle has moved after what I saw yesterday. I really think that Trudeau is going to be there in the election. What odds would I put it? I don't know, maybe 90%. If he survives this, and he survives a year of being down in the polls by 15, 20, and sometimes more points to the Conservatives, he's going to be there. So get ready for a spring election, Trudeau versus Poilievre. That's what I say. We'll see. Save that clip,
right.
If I'm wrong.
We'll save it. I'll hold you against it. We'll move to the other election that's just around the corner in Saskatchewan. There's going to be an election on October 28th, on Monday. And suddenly this is like really a toss-up election. I don't know what to believe anymore. There was an Insitrix research poll. Now, Insitrix has had a close race for a little while.
Yeah.
Their last two polls, which were done in the spring and then the summer, had a 1-point lead for the NDP. Now they have a 5-point lead for the NDP, Saskatchewan NDP 50%, the Saskatchewan Party 45%. We haven't seen any other polls that have the NDP literally ahead. We've seen some of them where they're relatively close. But what are we thinking now with this election? I am honestly not sure.
Yeah,
it feels hard to believe that the Sask Party could lose.
As I said, I'm reading a lot of local news to try to get up to speed and to understand better what's going on. I'm in Montreal, so obviously I'm far away, and I can't say I know the dynamics of Saskatchewan voters a lot. But I think we said all along throughout the spring and summer, Eric, that yes, this is going to be a closer election. The NDP should do better than it did in 2020. But the map is such that there's no way the Sask Party drops this, right? And suddenly, again, Insitrix sees something different. But the trend lines have been the same, meaning that it's been flat for most of the year, with Insitrix seeing the NDP at a higher level. But the trend lines have been the same. But just we know there's a Main Street research poll coming out of Saskatchewan. Kito Maggie teasing the crowd on Twitter yesterday, saying basically both parties are tied so far. We still have another day of fielding, but the NDP could win the popular vote and still lose the election. And is that real? It's incredible. It could be a big polling miss. Let's remember 2020 was a big polling miss big polling miss. They all saw the right winner, but the margins were underestimated, except for the Industry Institute. So we'll see final polls this weekend, but suddenly, I'm not sure I would put the odds of the Sask Party winning at 99% like I did for most of this year. I would still say they're the favorite, but not an overwhelmingly favorite, right? And again, when we break down the how polls did in this election, they could all be right. There could be some divergence. Looking forward to see the final numbers. I wish I had a better analysis right now, but we're recording this on Thursday, and all we had was Insightrix, and Insightrix shows that the NDP could win this election, which is incredible.
Yeah. The NDP lost the last 3 elections by an average of 31 points.
Oh my God.
And it was more or less every election was 60-30.
Yeah.
With some variation up or down. And now we're talking about 50-50, 45-45, depending on how much of the vote the other parties get. It's just an incredible thing. So it is going to be interesting to watch. We'll chat about the results next week. We're also going to have a special episode, which should be out on Friday. This will be for our Patreon members. It's one of the new things we're going to be doing. So once a month, we're going to be doing special episodes that we're going to have the Patreon members vote on what they want to see. Could be a deep dive into a historic election. Could be an all-quiz episode. Could be, we don't know. We're going to leave it up to the Patreon members to tell us. But this month, we're going to do a Saskatchewan projection meeting like we've done in the past with some of the media networks. We're going to go riding by riding, make our calls for them. So that episode should be out on Friday for members of the Patreon at thenumberspod.ca. We're going to probably have a lot more tosses than we thought we would have before. So we'll see. So thenumberspod.ca if you want to listen to that. And why don't we move to our last province, Ontario. We got a poll from Palace Data. It was done for the Trillium.
That's right.
41% for the PCs, 28% for the Liberals, 22% for the NDP, and we're all getting $200. I think, is that what it was?
Well, not me, but you are.
No, not you. Unrelated, I'm sure, to the election speculation.
Well, of course, but I think, Monsieur, we know that it's been a while that we saw them together, but during the pandemic especially, we saw Monsieur Legault, Premier of Quebec, and Monsieur Ford together a lot. They're sharing a beer. And we know not only from media reports, but from the staffers that they do get along. They're pals, right? And maybe Monsieur Ford saw what Legault did with sending a check, although it was like $500, so up the ante a little bit. Under $100 for everybody making under $100K. That was it. So Ford also disliked, or at least not very much like Premier, but his party is just throwing along. We joked to you and I about the Ontario number generator, a random generator. Palace has the same numbers basically as we've seen in recent months. This is a crushing victory for the PCs, and maybe the Liberals finally overcome the NDP in seats, but that's a big maybe. So this confirms that, well, not confirms, but you know what I mean. This shows that we're going to have very soon an Ontario election. When do you think it's going to be? In the spring? Before federal?
Well, it has to be before the federal. I imagine that it has to. That's what the plan should be for the PCs. They would want to get it done before the federal. If we assume that the budget for the federal budget is going to come sometime in April, maybe, then maybe Ford would drop the writ sometime in March. We have an earlier April election, something like that. But it's just remarkable, these numbers, 41, 28, 22. I'm pretty sure we could find a poll from the 2022 election with the exact same numbers.
Yes.
Things haven't moved around at all. And, the PCs have now been in power for also 6 years, so it's a little bit like the New Brunswick PCs. But cruising along, I wonder how these kinds of things work with such an obviously electoral ploy as sending checks out to every Ontarian. And I do enjoy how some of the media has said that 16 million Ontarians are going to be getting this check. Do you want to guess what the population of Ontario is?
Isn't it like 17 million? It's
16 million.
So everybody's going to get it. Everybody's going to get it?
Instead of just saying everybody, yeah, we're all getting it. Even my cat's going to get one, I think.
Nice.
She deserves it. She works hard for the Ontario economy. But anyway, so we'll see if that's going to have any impact. It feels unnecessary when they're ahead by this much. Unless they really believe that we all need that $200, especially people who don't need the $200. But we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen. It's a clear sign that they're gearing up for an election. They're talking a lot about bike lanes, trying to get that, make sure they sew up the suburban vote. And every poll that we see suggests that they're going to cruise along because the opposition parties are unpopular and continue to be divided.
Let's not get started on bike lanes. We could have a special episode on bike lanes actually, but not today. No.
All right, so we're getting to the end of the episode. You don't have a quiz this week. You said you might next week. We'll see.
Yes. I took a break again with the elections. We were really busy, but the quizzes will be back for Eric. Eric, tu perds rien pour attendre. We're gonna get back to that. Do you have a number of the week, my friend?
Yeah, and it's not anything too genius. It is going to be 20. 20 is my vote, my margin, my number of the week, because it's the vote margin, according to the last initial count from BC elections in Wandafuka Malahat. So 20 votes is what is separating the Conservatives and the BC NDP in that province. It just shows how every vote matters, even in a riding where you wouldn't have thought it was going to matter. This was John Horgan's old riding, partially his old riding.
Yeah.
It was always a safe NDP seat, and here they only end up winning it by 20 votes. We'll see if their margin increases after the count. Could decrease, could flip. But just a reminder that, you got to go out and vote, because sometimes it will actually make the biggest difference.
Absolutely. My number of the week is from the latest Léger poll that was published, I believe, this morning. So for the past few weeks, would you say the Canadian Parliament operates efficiently overall? I mean, it's a loaded question. I think if you ask anybody, do you think your government is efficient? Most people would say no. It's the breakdown by party that still fascinates me, though. So 16% of Canadians say it operates efficiently. 33%
These are eternal optimists. Wow, very impressed that 16% think it is working efficiently. All right, what's the inefficient number?
It's 61. But among Liberal voters, half of them still think it's inefficient. So I thought that was quite interesting. And the lowest among the parties was the Bloc Québécois. Only 9% of Bloc Québécois voters believe the federal government is efficient. So loaded question, but still interesting. Go check out this poll on Léger's website. It's there's no voting intentions in there, but it's still very interesting. Are you aware of procedural stalemate processes in the House of Commons? There's a bunch of there that are really interesting. So go check it out.
I do not believe that 45% of Canadians have heard of the procedural stalemate in the House of Commons.
Yeah, people are lying.
No chance. They just probably assume there's a stalemate in the House of Commons, but there's no chance they're aware of the specific filibuster that's taking place in the House of Commons right now. No chance of that. All right, so that'll be it for this week's episode. So as we mentioned, we are going to be changing things a little bit with the podcast. We are going to have now an episode that is available for everybody on your podcast app, on YouTube, every week. So we're going to put those out. We're going to try for usually the end of the afternoon on Thursdays. So those are going to be out, and they're going to be available for everybody. So you can find the Numbers podcast wherever you get your podcast. Should be available in any platform and on YouTube. We are going to also have every week a mailbag episode for our Patreon members. So if you are a Patreon member, the mailbag episode should be the next thing in your feed. And we're going to answer questions. We got a bunch of questions on BC. We got a couple questions on the federal level, some of the other provinces as well. So if you want to listen to the mailbag every week, you can go to thenumberspod.ca to join the Patreon, and it's just $5 a month. And you'll get access to the Discord and support our work. And finally, as we mentioned, special episodes once a month. We're going to have our members vote on the topic, do some fun stuff, really geek out on it, and we're really looking forward to it. So, Philippe, thanks so much. And we're going to do our mailbag episode right now. So if you guys want to listen to it, go to thenumberspod.ca. But thanks so much, Philippe, and looking forward to next week.
Merci beaucoup, Eric. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. See you in the mailbag.